You're listening to C-Suite Unplugged, a podcast by the Business Council of Alberta, where the province's top executives share their career story, what's happening at their companies, and speak candidly about the most pressing business issues. I'm your host, Adam Legge, and in each episode, I sit down with Alberta's leading CEOs, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders to explore their path to the top and what they're focused on right now. Enjoy the show. Today's guest has had a long and successful career in the oil industry. I love his mantra of always saying yes to an opportunity, which has taken him to work locations all over the world. Being an oil executive wasn't what he intended to do if you'd asked him early on in his life. But with an aptitude for numbers and experience in the industry, he never looked back. He sees opportunity and challenge, and that's exactly what brought him out of retirement to lead Canada's largest integrated oil company. He's an incredibly articulate and passionate advocate for the sector and has always been a tremendous supporter of me and the Business Council of Alberta. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Rich Kruger, President and CEO of Suncor Energy. Rich, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Adam.
Rich, one of the things that people love to hear about is the early story, the story of a CEO. It's an aspiring role that people have. They see you as the top of the corporate ladder, but they really want to see, how did that CEO get there? So maybe tell us a little bit about your early life. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And what were the early days of Rich Kruger's life like?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I started out as in a large Midwestern U.S. farming family. Aunts and uncles, they were dairy farmers, they raised beef cows, and I thought my life was going to follow that path. And as time went on, my father was a mailman, delivered mail, had an 8th grade education. My mom was a waitress. And there were very few people among all of my cousins that ever went past high school. And my father emphasized studying and the education and the opportunity that can provide you. So as time went on, I was interested in math and science, and I went to school to study mechanical engineering with the sole ambition that one day I would design and build farm equipment that would make my uncles' lives easier and more productive. That was the goal. I went to the University of Minnesota, and I graduated, and somehow I got this bug on the oil and gas industry. And so those same uncles who I had intended to enrich their lives used to complain to me over the years about the price of diesel, thinking that I somehow personally controlled that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was some pretty humble beginnings. The idea of being a senior executive was never, ever in my mind. It was, I believe with a farming background, you work hard, you work long, you work while the sun's up until the sun goes down, and you get what you deserve. In the university side, I mentioned we didn't have the money to pay for university. So whereas some of, I talk to colleagues today and they talk about the fun times of belonging to a fraternity or a sorority. Well, when that was going on, I was serving beer or parking cars to those same fraternity or sorority kids because I had to work to pay for each semester.
So was that your first job, Rich? Was serving beer?
I go back before that, and I quickly learned that whatever you spend in life, you've got to earn it. So early in life, I made my money with my brawn, not my brains. So I worked with a construction company as a helper. I worked for a moving company. Anything I could do to make more per hour, whatever it took. But what I figured out is I'm not going to get ahead in life with my brawn. I got to focus on my brain. And that was where the focus on education came in later.
Oh, that's awesome. Who were some of the formative people in your early years? Were there family, teachers, mentors, etc.?
I would say there's kind of 3 tiers. I'd start out with my brother. My brother was 12 years older than me. And of literally dozens of cousins, he was the first to ever go to university. And he studied engineering, and it was a challenge, but he became a chemical engineer. And so 12 years later, I come along, and I'm trying to decide what I want to do in life, what I want to study. And I couldn't go to my parents or my aunts and uncles. None of them had that experience. So I went to my brother, and he encouraged me to take the most difficult courses I possibly could in high school and prepare. And it, as a 14, 15, 16-year-old kid, that doesn't sound very fun, but I did it. And what I found then is as I got to university, it was easier because I had built the foundation, I had prepared. And quite frankly, my first year or two of university was almost like review because I had studied so hard in high school. So my brother was the one I immediately flashes to mind. And then when I was graduating from high school and trying to decide, what kind of engineering do I want to study, it was a high school teacher, a gentleman that I'd had him for several classes. He had taken a liking to me and I had respected him. And I spent a lot of time after class kind of talking to him about options. And he was the one that pointed me toward mechanical engineering. It was that simple. If he would have said electrical engineering, I'd probably have been an electrical engineer. Then as you get into your career, what I find, I read a lot, I study leadership a lot, and there's no single mentor along the way, but I would look at people and I would find attributes that I valued, their communication capability, their decisiveness, whatever it would be. So it was a bit more of a, kind of my mentor in that area was more of a collage of characteristics I would see. Jack Welch from his GE days, respected tremendous about. Lee Raymond was kind of the iconic Exxon CEO of the past. So there's no single person, but really attributes, because I figured that, I don't want to replicate or duplicate anybody. I want to create my own identity, my own brand, and you bringing that collage together, that's how I always thought I would do it.
That's amazing, because the collage you've created in terms of your capabilities, Rich, and I've seen you in your days at Imperial and now at Suncor. You've got an incredible ability to communicate very thoughtfully, very clearly. You're clearly an executive of significance in terms of what you've done at both throughout your career and now at Suncor. So you've picked some of those real great combinations of characteristics
thank you.
to bring into your leadership capabilities.
I appreciate that.
So you've got a mechanical engineering degree in Minnesota. You've got the whole world in front of you. Tell us, where did you go from there and get us to the point where you're CEO of Suncor?
I started my career, I moved significantly south. I moved from Minnesota, started out in Texas. And I drilled oil wells all around the Texas-Louisiana Gulf Coast and the Gulf of Mexico. I went to school at night and picked up an MBA. I wanted to understand more about business. And over the course of the career, what I found is if you have a curiosity and a willingness to try new things, there's no telling where life can take you. So as Exxon would offer me assignments, I said yes every time. I think the final count was 18 jobs in 38 and a half years. And I said yes to whether that was Southeast Asia, Malaysia, or Indonesia. I said yes to West Africa, Angola, or Nigeria. Yes to the Middle East, Abu Dhabi and Qatar. And ultimately, yes to Canada, which was now some 12 years ago. And, I liked it so much, I came back again.
Exactly.
So I found that, that curiosity to learn, that same kind of upbringing, that willingness to put in hard work, put in the hours with the goal of being the best. I don't believe I'm kind of a broken down old athlete. Throughout high school and a little bit into university, I played some sports. I wrestled, played some baseball. And I don't believe in doing anything to tie or to be average. I believe life is about being the best you can be. And if you bring that mindset to your career with a curiosity, a willingness to continue to listen and learn, it can take you anywhere. So Adam, I never even contemplated the idea of being a CEO at any point in time. That was never in my vision. It just kind of happened.
It sounds like you've been all over the world. Any interesting things jump out at you, or experiences, parts of the world you felt were just amazing, other parts that were challenging? Few people have ever had that kind of career move.
I would say that I find in that is over time, when you think about it, is you realize that as people, we all have a lot more in common than we do our differences. Now, we may have some ideological differences, religious differences, things, but there's, people worldwide want similar things. They want opportunity. They want health and safety for themselves and their family. They want the ability to give their kids a better way of life. And I've always found wherever I've worked is to not dwell on our differences, but really double down on our similarities. And from a leadership standpoint, when I would go and lead in different cultures, when I would lead a Muslim workforce in Malaysia 1 month after 9/11, it would have been easy to think of the severe differences we have.
Yeah.
But I've always tried to focus on the common things we share. And when you do that, you know, leadership is about, you're only a leader if you have willing followers. To create willing followers, you need to show people a pathway to a better future, whether that's their career, whether that's their fundamental life. And so I think the biggest learning for me from an international career is that we have more in common than we would think on the surface, and that if leaders, political, business, focus on what we have in common, I think we can get a lot more done in a lot more harmonious way than focusing on our differences.
And I really like the way you put it, the willing followers. It's you have to inspire, you have to enable people to see the best in themselves and the better future and the capabilities that enable them to bring their best every day.
And that's really the Suncor story.
Mm-hmm.
In the, you know, what we are is we're of course Canada's largest integrated oil company, large upstream, large downstream, petroleum product sales through the Petro-Canada brand. We're coast to coast in, you know, we're in every province in one way or another. And we had been a company that at one point had done quite well, but for a number of years it was stumbling. It was not performing to its full potential. And so coming into this role, it was helping enable people to see what we can achieve if we have clear objectives, if we focus on our priorities. And then as you started to get some success in that, you know, it's momentum, and I believe in momentum, and people like to feel proud and that they're a part of a meaningful cause. And I think that is the epitome over the last few years, what we've seen at Suncor.
Rich, you said early years you were a wrestler and a baseball player. What are some of your hobbies these days when you actually have some spare time or free time?
Well, you know, I think you hit on it. Is one of the most precious things you have as a senior executive is your spare time. And so you really, I try to be very thoughtful on how I spend it. I believe in taking care of myself. I'm kind of a bit of a fitness nut. It's a way to not only help my health, but also mental health and the sanity that goes with that. So if a day goes by that I don't get some form of workout in, I get a little anxious. So I do that a lot.
Are you a cardio guy, a strength guy?
You know, when I was younger, I thought I just wanted to be big and strong. And then as I gotten older, I just want to live long and be healthy.
And not have achy joints.
Yeah, so I've kind of shifted over time. Yeah. But I do a bit of all of that, a bit of cardio, strength training. I like it all. I read a lot. I do think life is about continuous lifelong learning. And my mom used to say, you know, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So I try to learn, and I do that through engaging with people. I do that through reading. That's a big part of it. I'm a sports fan, so I all types of sports. I like the competition aspect of it. And last but certainly not least is in that, you know, that rare spare time is my family.
Yeah.
And I've got 3 adult sons who are different as the day is long. But now they've started to bless me with grandchildren.
Oh, awesome.
I moved up here a little more than 2 years ago with a cute little granddaughter. And now 2 years later, I have a granddaughter and 3 grandsons.
Awesome.
And so they're all in Texas. And so when there is spare time, I find, you know, it's pretty easy to get from here to Texas. Yeah. And they come here. So, you know, there's not as much spare time as I like, but I tend to fill it with things that are of biggest priority for me.
Oh yeah, and what is better than grandchildren, right? So I don't know yet, but I keep hearing all about it.
Well, you know, they're awesome when they, you know, you spoil them, you snuggle them, and when they get fussy, you hand them right back.
That's what I hear the biggest perk of grandparenting is. Yeah.
Exactly.
So you're a big reader. What are some of your favorite books or something you're reading right now?
I mentioned Jack Welch a little earlier. He's put out quite some good books. He's got one called Winning.
Yes,
that I like. That is personally one of my favorites. And I like some kind of ones that make me that you don't read at bedtime because they're pretty challenging to read, but deal with kind of the complexity of organization. So there's one called The Fifth Discipline that I like, and it's about how organizations function. And I think if I can go back to leadership for a minute, is understanding how organizations function. And a lot of times leaders refer to it as the culture of an organization. Mm-hmm. And I spend a lot of time thinking about that. Developing our strategies can be fairly straightforward. How we organize ourselves or structure ourselves as an enterprise can be relatively straightforward. But I think the real secret sauce, the winning formula, is in the culture of an organization. Yes. And oftentimes it can be viewed as, kind of complex or mysterious. I don't look at it that way at all. I look at all the determinants that go into creating the culture of an organization, and I break it into pieces and then look at each of those pieces and say, are they aligned with, or do they contribute to the culture we're trying to create? And if they don't, you modify or change those piece by piece. And as they're all bolted back together, that drives you toward the culture that you strive for. So I read books and things that deal with not just kind of fundamental leadership principles, but some of the cultural aspects, and that kind of require that I think about the organization almost as a kind of a living entity, an organization much like a human body where all the parts work together. I like books that lead me to think about the organization I lead in much the same way. It's how it all interacts together that produces the superior results.
Business is an organism to some degree. It's alive, it's changing, it's evolving, it's trying to find its path. Exactly. And if you don't have those helpful elements or values, behaviors, you need to tweak those and create that aggregation of those as your culture. Exactly.
And I think that's been a big part of Suncor's journey over the last couple of years. We defined the culture we want to create: team-based, results-oriented, high performance. And now everything we do, we look at through those three lenses, and are they driving us toward that culture? So there have been a lot of changes to it. And I think if you look at our performance today versus what it was a few short years ago, it's materially different. And you attribute that to, well, we have the same assets, same people, but we're creating the environment for them to excel in. Mm-hmm. And that is, it's fun to be a part of. I mean, quite frankly, it was the big opportunity on why I chose to join the company, and now seeing the people embrace and excel with that cultural change, that's really rewarding.
Well, we're just about to jump into Suncor and what you've been doing there, but the closing question on the personal life, and it's going to be the most sensitive question of the podcast, Rich. Sadly, we're recording this the day after the Oilers got defeated in the Stanley Cup Finals, but when the Wild and the Flames are in the Saddle Dome, who are you cheering for?
Well, I'm going to give you a third choice. So, I said I'm a big sports fan, and I believe wherever I've lived, I tend to embrace the local sports team. Yeah. But, what you find is your roots get quite deep. Yeah. So I grew up with the Minnesota North Stars. Of course, They moved to Dallas. Yeah. And so, when the puck drops, I might say, okay, I'm rooting for the Flames or the Oilers, but if they're playing my Stars and the puck drops, I find my loyalty still resides with that home team back so long ago.
Even with the move to Dallas.
Even with the move, and I happen to live in Dallas over the course of my career. And I was there when they won their lone Stanley Cup. Yep. So that was that sticks with you. Awesome. Now I was rooting for the Oilers last night, of course, but.
We all were, sadly. Sadly, didn't pan out the way we hoped. But so Suncor. You've talked a little bit about it, the company, a few minutes ago, but if there's anything you want to touch on in terms of just our listeners of what Suncor is as a company and what you do, feel free to.
Absolutely. I mentioned we're Canada's largest integrated oil company, which means we have upstream, downstream. We have operations all the way from in a mining sense, the mine face or the production sense, all the way through the customer. Mm-hmm. And what that does, that integration, it gives us a level of kind of natural hedge against market conditions. Oil prices go up, it helps our upstream. Oil prices go down, our refining feedstocks are cheaper. So the business, that integrated business model we have, and then taking it all the way to the customer, that's what makes us unique. That is our winning proposition. So looking at how we do everything along that value chain for our shareholders, that's who we are. And if an investor is looking for a pure play refiner or a pure play producer or something, that's not us. Mm-hmm. So what we value is operational excellence, predictability, sustainability, so that as investors make their decisions and would identify a company like Suncor, they can sleep well at night knowing their investment is well managed and is literally built for the uncertainty or volatility that often comes in an oil and gas business. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of who we are. And of course, with my background, with time at Imperial was similar to that. And time with Exxon, of course, Exxon was similar to that in a global sense. So my understanding of the company, the fundamentals was quite high. And if I can go back, how the heck did I end up here? I was in retirement for literally 3 years after a 38 and a half year career. So the true story is I was down in St. Lucia. I was waist deep drinking a Mai Tai. It was about noon. If I'm really telling the truth, it wasn't the first one of the day. and my phone rang. And it was a 403 area code. And I thought, I normally don't answer my phone if I don't know a number. And I thought, well, that's odd. Yeah. But, I answered it. And I was being contacted as a reference for someone the board was considering for this job. Mm-hmm. And long story short, here I am. But what attracted me about it is I have a passion for the oil and gas industry, particularly the global context of it. Fell in love with Canada the first time I was here for 7 years. Other than the U.S., it's the longest I've lived anywhere. And being from Minnesota, I joke I'm kind of half Canadian to begin with. Yeah. So winter actually, that worked. And then I looked at the company and its performance level, and I, humbly thought I could make a difference. Mm-hmm. And if you can make a difference in life, it gets back to, some of the earlier conversation. If you can contribute to something and personally make a difference, that's a pretty good life. Mm-hmm. My kids were grown, so I didn't have to rush home and, help anybody with homework or go coach a soccer team. I had the time. I certainly have the energy. And I thought my background and experience was something that could benefit the company. So that's what got me here a bit more than 2 years ago. My board, often asks, Rich, how long, are you willing to do this? I said, well, 3 things have to exist. I have to be having fun, and I tell you, I'm having the time of my life. I have to believe personally that I'm making a difference, and I still think I am making a difference. And then last but not least, the board has to believe I'm making a difference. Mm-hmm. And if those 3 things are in place, I don't kind of look at time as a timeline or a date. It's, I still jump out of bed quite early in the morning, get into the office or go to one of our operating sites, and look forward to that each day. It's that's fun for me.
You're doing an amazing job, Rich, and it must have been a pretty compelling call to pull you out of St. Lucia with a Mai Tai in your hand for sure.
It's there's days I wake up and go, what the heck? I work for Suncor. You never would have pictured that one, in life. Exactly. But again, I think it gets back to the earlier part of the conversation on career. I think advice I give my own kids is you never know where your journey will take you, but if you have a passion, an energy, a motivation, and if you're willing to follow it. Generally, I believe good things happen. Mm-hmm. And I put this in the same category. I would never have seen this, would never have guessed it, but I thought, again, that I had something to offer. And I think if you have something to offer in life, whatever it is, shame on you if you don't offer it. Yeah. So that was what got me here.
That's amazing. And, I think for many times in people's careers that we don't necessarily envision the role we're in today 5 years ago, and just pathways and doors open and emerge. And as you say, you've had a history of saying yes to lots of things and trying to make things better. So thank you for saying yes and coming back and being such an amazing leader here.
Great that they let me back in the country.
yeah, exactly. You talked about making things better, and you spent a number of the past years working in the business, really getting Suncor operationally improved and performance improved. Tell us, what are some of the things you've been doing, and what are you most proud of since you've taken over as CEO?
Well, I think first and foremost, when you run a big industrial company like ours, we have 15,500 employees, and we have more than that in terms of contractors each and every day that show up on our site. So I look at it as a leadership imperative, almost literally a moral obligation to keep people safe. And so we've spent and the company had issues with that in the past. So we've spent a lot of time on how do we keep people safe. And that all starts with leadership. It continues with your work management systems, your procedures, the processes that people follow, your ability to assess, understand, and mitigate risks. So we put a great deal of effort on that. And I couldn't be more pleased to say that 2023 and 2024 were the company's safest years in its history. That was, so it starts with that. And then once you're safe, then it gets about driving performance improvement. And in a capitally intensive business like ours, where we have so much capital employed, it's imperative that you maximize the utilization of that. So reliability, operational integrity, avoiding those disruptions to operations or upsets that take production offline. Because when we use our facilities to their full capability, we drive down costs and everything tends to fall in place. So I literally, the first interaction I had with the leadership team, the top 75 or so with the company, was the day my appointment was announced. I was in Houston at the time, and we had a webcast, and I said, what you can expect from me is a very intense focus on the fundamentals: safety, operational integrity, reliability, and profitability. 4 things. They're not complex, they're easy to remember. And here we are 2+ years later, and I reiterate those same things. If not daily, almost daily. Because if you get those right, all of the other more complex things in our business tend to fall in place. But if you don't get the fundamentals right, you don't have a snowball's chance in Houston of the rest of it being right. So I very much believe in, the fundamentals. And I think a big part of leadership, we work in a complex business. But a big part of my job is not to translate that complexity down in the organization, but I think a big part of my job is to provide clarity, simplification, and focus. Clarity on what's most important to us, what our objectives, priorities are. Simplify in terms of looking at how we go about our work. Don't make it more complex, but make it easier to do what's most important. And then again, create that focus that when you have as many people and contractors we have, if you're all working as a unified, cohesive team, I believe people can fundamentally move, literally or figuratively move mountains. And so focusing on the fundamentals, clarify, simplify, focus. I mean, that's kind of my brand at its essence. And I've didn't develop that upon coming to Suncor. I believed in that for a long time. And so now it's been about applying those principles, those concepts, those leadership mantra at the company.
One of the things that I really like, if you were to go to the Suncor webpage, you'll see stories of your team and your staff and some of their backgrounds and histories. And it's clear that you place a lot of importance on people, and you've talked about the responsibility to keep them safe. What drives you to focus on your people so much?
I think at the end of the day, assets come and go and strategies can change overnight. But I think really what the differentiators between, the great companies and the rest are its people and the leadership that is provided to those people. So I do spend a fair bit of time with steel-toe boots and a hard hat on, going to our operating sites, whether that's our refineries, our mines, or in situ operations. I like talking to people, not just in boardrooms or conference rooms, but getting out and walking along along a facility or crawling up into a cab of a truck or a shovel. And when you do that, I find that's where you often learn what some of the best opportunities are. And so when, of late in particular, as we've continued to improve performance, I also think as CEO, one of my big jobs is a storyteller for the company, internally and externally. So the stories are about people and what they're able to achieve. So on my earnings calls, I often name names, all the way from one of my executive team members to an operator at one of our facilities and everywhere in between. And because, it's not me that gets that work done, it's those people. And so that recognition, I started doing that kind of internally, but what we're finding out is externally, it's caught a lot of attention. It's like, wow, we have a CEO who actually talks about his people by name, which means he must know them. Well, of course I do. I have every other week, I have a breakfast with the boss, and I get 15 random people throughout the organization, all different levels, all different groups, and we sit down 7:30 to 9, and we just cup of coffee, maybe a couple of Timbits, and we just talk about what's ever on their minds. I do that in person, but I also do it virtually with our operating sites. I think it helps translate the priorities of the enterprise from top to bottom. But what it also does, it gives me insights on what's on people's minds. And I think, if you're a leader, you need to understand and know the people you're leading. And so activities like that, I look for ways to do that, to engage with people, to help share, kind of where I come from. And, fundamentally, we're not all that much different. I find within our company, there's a lot of kids just like me that came from a farm somewhere in Saskatchewan or Alberta or whatever. And, we have different roles at the end of the day. But as I said, people fundamentally at our core, we're not that much different.
So you're probably in the room with a future Rich Kruger among some of your colleagues there.
Well, I think that is, a little bit on a different topic. I think that is a really key part of my job, is developing people, not only technical and operational, but the leadership of the future. I think the best companies generally prioritize internal succession, developing people that share the values, understand the priorities. You have fewer false positives when you promote or advance someone internally, because you know them and they know you. So at a personal level, I spend a lot of time on leadership development with my HR organization, with our executive leadership team, because it is about finding the future, whether it's CEOs or site managers or CFOs or whatever it happens to be. I see that as a core element of my responsibility.
Yeah. Rich, Suncor has a long history of engaging and working with Indigenous communities. One of the very first equity participation opportunities that I can recall in Alberta here was the East Tank Farm, that I know predates your tenure with Suncor, but Indigenous engagement, participation in the future is a key part of Suncor's DNA. Tell me what's happening these days.
I think it is, and you said it well. It goes back. The company has had a long priority in that, well before me. And when I joined the company, I started to see some of the statistics about the business development, the Indigenous employment, the community development, and it is definitely a source of pride. I think it's a source of competitive advantage, and it's not about necessarily competing, but it's about doing the right thing. And when you look at where our operations are, and that they're in the very nations or in the communities of our Indigenous partners, I think it's incumbent upon us to create the environment where we all win, where we all benefit. And I would say that it's more than this, but it's really kind of a three-legged stool. It's the business opportunities to partner with in business. It is the employment opportunities to create a Indigenous workforce. And then it is the community. So it's kind of, I look at it, not to oversimplify it, but I look at it through kind of those three legs of that stool. And I think Suncor has a long history in it, a successful, but I think it's like everything. You can always get better. You can always do more. And that's certainly our priority.
Rich, since you joined Suncor, you've made some significant investments in the business, including some innovations like the world's largest hydraulic shovel in the world. Why are some of these investments important?
I think it's important that when you in the oil sands in particular, that you recognize we're really part of a global energy equation. There's the world produces some 100 million barrels a day or more of liquids, and we're part of that mix. And so you need to be as competitive locally as you can relative to your peer group, but you can never lose sight of the essence or the importance of being competitive globally, because the marginal barrel, whether it's for development or operating costs, is the barrel at risk. Yeah. And so in our business, I looked at it with experience elsewhere and saw that we had opportunities to improve our competitiveness, to lower our cost structure, what we call our break even, and technology and in mining scale were a big part of that. So over the last couple of years, we have put a big push to upgrade our mining truck fleet, buying state-of-the-art, the best of the best mining trucks from our original equipment manufacturer partners on it, converting those increasingly to autonomous operation, to have a safer operation, and again, a more productive operation, pairing them with companion equipment like the world's largest hydraulic shovel. I was up there a few weeks ago when we cut the ribbon on that and put that in play. I was begging my site leadership, let me get in the cab and lift that shovel. They very quickly said, Rich, you're not qualified. Yeah, exactly. So I just got to look at it and take pictures. But I think technology, teamwork, and recognizing that your your true benchmark is a global benchmark or a part of our drive to improve our operations. And I, for us, mining is on the higher end of the cost curve for oil and gas. So you need to be more productive. You need to be driving innovations. And this is an area I would say I'm extremely proud of our workforce for embracing that, understanding that. And as we brought in new equipment, new technologies to keep people safe, to be more productive, to lower costs, it's making a difference. We're moving the needle. And I think that's good for our employees, it's good for our shareholders, it's good for Alberta, it's good for Canada. Everybody wins when our industry and a company our size is stronger and more competitive.
Yeah, totally agree. And we'll get to some of the policy issues affecting that, but the autonomous fleet is just such a great innovation that helps not only the efficiency of the organization but safety, etc.
And if I can maybe comment on it, I think it's a good example of Suncor today looking for best practices and benchmarking wherever they may exist. So the onset of autonomous wasn't in Canada, it was in hard rock mining in places like Australia and elsewhere. So as we've looked further afield for best practices, when we benchmark our refining, we don't benchmark against Canadian refineries alone, we benchmark against all of North America. And if there's no one industry, country, company that holds the best ideas, you have to be willing to look far afield to see where there are ideas, technologies, applications that you can bring in. And oftentimes I think companies get a little bit overconfident and think they have the monopoly on good ideas. I think that's what leadership is all about, to be pleased with the progress, but always driving for what's the next opportunity. And sometimes you have to look further and further afield. And I think the mining is a classic example of that. Building that largest hydraulic haul truck, that was many years in the making. But it was the last few years, Peter Zebedee, who runs our oil sands mining, said, wow, this is a game changer for us. So working with our original equipment manufacturer out of Germany and Japan and the US, it was an international project. We're completing a project right now at our base plant replacing 60-year-old coke drums. We have contractors in from the Netherlands operating the heavy lifts, the cranes, so that recognizing we're part of a global industry and bringing the best global partners to bear, that's how you win.
And it's so important to think laterally, in the sense that if you had just looked around the world at oil and gas companies, you may not have found the autonomous truck opportunity, but you had to look into mining. And I think that really is a critical factor. If you begin to get too myopic and tunnel vision, there's just you're competing within your sector for ideas. You miss those. I love what you were saying, just sort of about continuing to look for new ideas. And there's a great quote that I saw one time in a newspaper that Globe and Mail years ago, that Darren Entwistle, CEO of TELUS, said, I have a permanent dissatisfaction with the status quo. And I love that quote and I told him years later that really inspired me, because there was something that he articulated a feeling that I always had.
I totally agree. We have made a lot of progress in the last couple of years, but our internal rallying cry is we're not done yet. Yeah. There's more you can do. And I think that'll always be true. The best companies, they're always looking to reinvent, reinvigorate, or improve their performance, whether it's big or small. That's what winners do, whether you're a sports team, whether you're a company. And it's cultural. And that's the culture that I believe we're increasingly creating.
Yeah. Well, let's move to the big picture, Rich, in terms of the environment, the business environment, the policy environment. Let's start with a broad question in terms of how would you characterize Canada as a place to invest in the oil and gas sector?
I think it's important to first, if you look at the global oil and gas world, we mentioned that world consumes more than 100 million barrels a day. Canada is about 5% of that, roughly. And around the world, no matter what you believe on the absolute level of consumption in the world's going to need oil and gas for a long time. And it is a depletable resource. So by definition, it's depleting without new investment. Mm-hmm. So we can argue and debate, a lot of people do, what the long-term demand is. Have we reached peak oil? When's it going to peak? But the undeniable fact is new investment's going to be required. So then you say, well, where's that investment going to occur? There are fundamentally 10 countries in this world that hold 90% of the remaining world oil reserves. 10 countries. Most of them are not in great neighborhoods. So when you look at Canada is either third or fourth, however you look at it on the list, the question to me should not be why Canada. The right question is why not Canada? And we have the resource, we have the technology, the capability. Global consumers want the product we produce. It's Canada's, it's kind of its superpower in a way. The energy sector can drive our economy, enrich Canadians' quality standard of life, and do good things abroad. Where if we provide Canadian oil and gas to other countries, where they then use less coal or less oil, whatever the case may be, we can tackle emissions and climate change while at the same time enriching Canada. So I think that's the huge opportunity for this sector. The last decade has been arguably a lost decade. Yeah. So you'd asked about competitiveness. So Canada has everything it needs to become this energy superpower. The only thing that's gotten in its way is ourselves. We have hindered the development of the full potential. And I think we've done that under kind of perspectives or beliefs that, quite frankly, looking at oil and gas in a global context, I think have been misguided. Mm-hmm. I think a good, strong Canadian oil and gas sector not only benefits us economically, can help the world tackle climate change, and it helps strengthen alliances, partnerships with our geopolitical allies. I mean, it's win-win-win. Yeah. And that's how I see the Canadian oil and gas sector. And when you ask me, on that moment of weakness coming out of retirement, that was also part of it. I see the potential of this industry, and how cool would that be to be a part of that, achieving its potential?
Yeah. We have what so many countries would just kill to have, and we are constraining it. In fact, in many ways, we're obstructing it intentionally with policy and regulation. It's incredibly frustrating. I totally agree. We've lost a decade. We sent international world leaders home empty-handed when they come to our shores. And it is who we are as Canada. Former Deputy Prime Minister John Manley refers to the resource sector as the family business of Canada. And I completely agree. Oh, Rich, what are some of those specific things that are getting in, that we've put in our own way to restrict the development and export of our resources?
When you think about a global business, again, that requires extensive amounts of capital, so it's a capital-intensive business. Well, what does capital seek? It seeks an element of predictability, confidence that'll deliver a return on capital. In the oil and gas business, companies like ours, we take price risk, supply and demand risk, technical risk, operational risk. There's a whole host of risks that are just inherent in being in our business as we make investments. But when you add on top of that additional risks, that's what chills the investment climate. And that's what's happened here. So what have been or are those additional risks? Regulatory, for one. The complexity, the uncertainty, the discretion, the overlapping nature of policies, the whole confusion of that. It's the opposite of clarify, simplify, focus that I said I'm trying to create internally. We've had the opposite of that. You don't know the rules of the game. When the puck drops, you don't know, what if the rules at the start are going to be the rules midstream. That just chills and scares capital. So I would say that's the biggest area. And then I'd continue. You're familiar, 38 CEOs, we signed a letter to the political candidates and then ultimately to the Prime Minister that if you want to build Canada now, if you want to unleash the potential of this industry, we outlined 5 things that were kind of the imperatives. It wasn't a smorgasbord. Don't pick and choose. Yeah. We need these 5 things. The first one was the regulations, not necessarily in order, but we have to create a fiscal environment that's attractive. When you look at investing money in one jurisdiction versus another, capital is largely blind to where it is. So if we're not competitive on a fiscal, on a tax, a royalty, all of the all-in costs, carbon costs, well, capital won't go here, it will go elsewhere. So regulatory, fiscal. The third one is, I would put it a bit more, we didn't phrase it this way, but is the ideology. We said we need to be willing to grow production, not limit it. So some of the policies in place that put caps or limits on the industry's ability are very counter to attracting new investment. So that would be a third area. And the fourth area is project and timelines. When we start a project, we spend material amount of capital along the way, and it might take from the origin of a project to putting it online for the preliminary design, the front-end engineering, the project planning, execution. That can be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, but we're spending along the way. So getting it approved up front in a timely manner is imperative. If not, it just extends that timeline and then capital is idle. So defined project timelines was the fourth area in the fifth. And the fifth was Indigenous partnerships, is allowing Indigenous nations to benefit with resource development in the same way we do. So there were 5 prerequisites. There were I paraphrase them quite quickly there, but I think what's important is they're not the pick and choose. Can't do this one without that one. They go together. And to get 38 CEOs to sign the same letter, I can assure you, Adam, that was not an easy task. But it shows how aligned the industry is and how important we all see this topic and the opportunity for Canadians nationwide and here closer to home for Alberta. It's just, now's the time, and we were hoping that this letter would provide that catalyst.
And I think to your point about it's not a pick and choose 2 out of 5, but it's also not a certain projects get this 5 and everybody else gets the status quo. And I think that's really a key message we're trying to share with the federal government is we want them to put some fundamental policy shift in the window to convince the broad base of Canada's resource sector that this government is different, that they want production to grow, they want to export our resources, they want to be that energy superpower. And I do worry about an asymmetrical policy environment if it's not a sort of blanket removal of the emissions cap, if it's not a blanket change to our regulatory environment. I do think we can pick some early projects like a Pathways, for example, but it's further future change has to follow, I think.
Well, there's certainly, certainly certain projects can move the needle more than others, but that's not how free markets work. There can be literally hundreds of projects, big and small, and they need to understand what the rules of the game are, how they can go about applying for regulatory approvals, how they can have confidence in the regulatory environment and understanding that those rules will endure, that the fiscal environment can provide incentives for them, because it's not just a small handful of big things, particularly that the government picks the winners and losers on. This is where the strength of this entire industry nationwide can be far more beyond a list of a few key projects. That's what the 38 CEOs would hope to achieve, is something where you build the momentum on the industry, and it's way more than 1 or 2 key projects.
Yeah, it's got to be a broad policy regulatory shift. Exactly. You spent some time with Prime Minister Carney talking about the Build Canada Now letter and the five requirements to get the sector back to a competitive position. What's your take to date? Is you feeling comfortable?
So a group of us spent time with the Prime Minister. We also spent time on a couple of different occasions with the Natural Resource Minister and others. And I would say I'm encouraged by the willingness to listen, and to the messages I just conveyed on the Build Canada Now letter have been conveyed quite clearly in each of those forums. And I think we found open audiences. I think it's like some of my earlier comments. I think we share a number of objectives, and if we focus on those objectives and what it takes to achieve them, we can go a long way. But I also, being an executive, I'm paid to also be, thoughtful and manage risk and uncertainty. So the real proof is going to be, what are the actions? What comes about of it? But in that, the new government quite quickly spent time in the West, talking to industry leaders. I was really encouraged by that.
Yeah, I was in Ottawa a few weeks ago. I came away with a couple of observations. The first is they are seized with a sense of urgency. I've never seen a government in Ottawa move with the pace and the desire that I think the Prime Minister is underscoring. But I also heard quite consistently, bring us deals. We'll figure out the details later. And again, it gets back to that point about it can't just work for one or two projects. It's got to work for all projects.
Well, if I said it, and not to dismiss it too much, but if I were looking at bringing a multi-billion-dollar investment to my board of directors, that would need to authorize that, and I would say, okay, here's what it looks like. The regulatory environment is, a lot is uncertain. We'll kind of work it as we go. The fiscal framework is, still to be defined, but trust us, it'll all work out. That would be a very difficult sell.
Yeah.
Because particularly on the heels of the last decade, where that hasn't existed. And there have been too many projects that actually started, Keystone XL, Energy East, others that went down the path only to get hit an impermeable wall. Yeah. So we're in a system right now. I understand and I share the urgency. I think that's, there's nothing like a crisis to bring minds together on it. But I would just, I urge the politicians that, at the end of the day, it's kind of like my business. You got to get the fundamentals right. And if the fundamentals are right, you will achieve the results. And that's why I keep going back to the letter from the CEOs. I think we outlined the fundamentals, what are really needed to create the sustainable economic environment that I believe we increasingly want to create in this country. But if we don't get those fundamentals right, we're inevitably going to have to come back to them. Yeah. And so I'd rather get them right up front and proceed on that basis.
Rich, you and I are in violent agreement about the importance of the oil and gas sector to Canada, what it contributes, what it does, and its opportunities into the future. What would you say to an average Canadian in Ontario, Quebec, that are in many ways so removed from the sector, about why we should continue to focus on the oil and gas sector?
I'll go back to my career. I've now more than 40 years. I've lived or worked in one way or another in more than 20 countries on nearly every continent. And I've seen what affordable, reliable energy can provide to people and their livelihood. And I've seen what the absence of that can result in. The health and well-being of you personally, of your kids, the optimism for the future. And there isn't any technology or industry that isn't without its challenges, but I believe in technology and people, Canadians, and if our issue is reducing the carbon emissions with an energy source the world relies on now and will rely on for decades, I believe that working together we can tackle that. So oil and gas are not four-letter words. They're incredible. They are what Mother Nature has blessed this country with, and providing it in abundant supplies to our partners and customers around the world. I think that's Canada's opportunity. And I would just say it's kind of shame on us if we don't create the environment that does that. And we can do it. As I said, I've lived and worked in a lot of places, and I can put my hand on any book you ask me to put it on and talk about the safety standards, the human rights standards, the environmental standards. Canadians can hold their head high because on a global basis, we do things the right way. And I think that can and should be a source of national pride and a rallying cry that supports this industry punching above its weight, not only domestically or with our largest trading partner to the south, but globally. And the more we share that vision and that understanding, I think the country will really enjoy what the industry can provide for it for decades to come. And I'll just kind of wrap that up with, that's part of the passion I have for being in this industry as long as I have been.
Well, Rich, you are an amazing executive. You've transformed the sector here in Canada throughout your career at Imperial and Suncor. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your ability to articulate these issues so clearly, because I think it's you take what is a complex business, you take what is a complex and even emotional issue for many people when they think about, as you say, the 4-letter words of oil and gas, and you make it human, you bring it down to the ground, and you make it approachable. And so I think that is adding to your operational and performance excellence. So thank you for your leadership.
Adam, thank you very much. I really enjoyed being here with you today.
Thank you. You've been listening to C-Suite Unplugged. As always, it's a privilege to spend some time with the leading executives of our membership. Thank you to our guests this month for sharing their journey and insights. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to review and share the podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time with more unfiltered leadership stories from the C-Suite.